It looked like a man, a very tall figure, and I don't know what it was, and I never will, wearing a coyote pelt.
You know exactly what that is.
They go by many names.
And I go, listen, and you heard, somebody help me.
You're the one person that's gonna understand. You're the one person that's gonna believe.
You weren't there. You didn't see what I saw.
They have to kill someone of an immediate family.
The name that is considered the most forbidden in Navajo is... Good evening, viewers. I am Matt, and I welcome you once again to the only podcast that is recorded from the inside of a haunted brothel, Fear Frontier, the podcast. And tonight's episode is brought to you by the frightening shapes that materialize when your eyes are not yet adjusted to the darkness, of course making falling asleep all that much harder. But of course, I do not do this podcast all alone, for once again I am joined tonight by my spectacular specters, Fear Frontier.
And this is Michael.
I'm Chloe.
And I'm Riley.
And for tonight's episode, how to discuss something that is not actually meant to be discussed. Something that is not meant to be spoken about, or written about, or honestly even thought about. But given that we tonight have chosen to, for better or worse, take on this controversial subject, I would say carefully, respectfully, and honestly, as we intend to do tonight, accurately. For tonight's episode is about something that is sacred, considered immeasurably dangerous, but also casts its shadow on the very grounds that we are recording from. They go by many names, but of course, originally deriving from the Navajo language, the name that is considered the most dangerous to say, as well as the most forbidden. A name that I am actually going to say right now, out loud, once. So if you do not wish to hear the name, or even read the name, cover your ears, hide your eyes, because that was your final warning. The name in Navajo is Yitnadlushi. Which means, with it, he goes on all fours. Describing that of a human who has transformed themselves into an animal. Through means of great sadness and despair, and brings nothing but plight onto the community. But you viewers may refer to them, and hear them referred to more as Skinwalkers. All of us at this table tonight have informative things to say on this controversial topic. We also have true stories to share, as well as even show. Many of them taking place in the very location that we are recorded in right now. And we hope that you viewers are willing to stay with us until the very end. It is said that when one discusses the subject of skinwalkers, or even pays them any mind at all, that a skinwalker is aware, and that one can even be drawn towards you from even thinking about them. But is it just a myth? Or by even continuing to watch this episode, are you putting yourselves, viewers, at some kind of potential risk? Let's get into it. Now, first of all, some of you may ask what a Navajo skinwalker actually is. But just as important, is what a Navajo Skinwalker is not. There is a lot of misinformation on this subject out there.
This thing, right here. What the f*** is that?
A creepy pale figure can be seen on all fours with its head sticking out.
In fact, I would say there's even more incorrect, nonsensical information than what that is of actual Navajo culture. But a Navajo Skinwalker is not a cursed person, nor are they werewolves, nor can they actually turn into a human being, which is so commonly believed. A Navajo Skinwalker is a witch who has the ability to either possess or even turn themselves into an animal. And they do this under the guise of pure evil and with nothing more than ill intent. And it is even done intentionally and at great cost. So why then does one choose to become a Skinwalker? What benefit is there? And how does one actually choose to turn their back on their family, their heritage, and what their entire culture stands for?
The Navajo Indian, greatest of all Indians.
Well, it begins with a moral choice. Now, it usually starts with the initial hatred of an individual or group of individuals, so much to where you have to make that moral choice, or you're willing to make that moral choice to get revenge or do harm to someone. Now, to become a Skinwalker, you first have to be initiated into a secret society. He or she, the witch that is wanting to transform into a Skinwalker, would be led into the forest or into the desert and into a secret area where they're taught how to do the darker parts of magic, and they start doing very dark rituals. We don't really know what all the rituals are. The natives, the Navajo, have kept that very, very secret for a purpose. But we do know that one of the main things that the individual has to do to become a Skinwalker is they have to kill someone of an immediate family. That can be a mother, a father, brother, sister, grandparents, even your own children.
Killing a loved one is the ultimate price to pay for this ability to be able to shapeshift. It is here that evil tests the curious beyond what most people would be willing to do. But sadly and horrifyingly, people will choose that this price is worth it to them. It is true that the ritualistic secrets required to become a Skinwalker are forbidden to be spoken about outside of the rituals themselves. From what we are able to understand, to the best of our abilities, is that there are 4 ritualistic dances to be performed, as well as 4 songs to be sung, followed by dark magic and practices involving items and materials from both the living as well as often the deceased, which some will go to great lengths to obtain. These dark ceremonies will not only grant you the ability to perform the transformation, but to help you obtain power after doing so. One can only shapeshift into an animal that they themselves have hunted and sacrificed in the ritualistic manner, including carving the necessary symbols into the interior flesh of the animal. The skin of the carcass is then worn in order to become the animal. After this, the Skinwalker is one with this earth. free to roam as either a human or as a beast, holding within it a darkness so evil one can be exiled for even speaking about it.
So think about it. Something made someone make a choice to abandon everything in their life and switch over to doing nothing but evil.
You know, it's terrifying.
It terrifies me.
Their own selfish gain, they're willing to literally harm somebody they love. Imagine wanting something and the price is your spouse, your father, your mother, your children, and then you're like, sure, I'd rather have this. It's a really horrifying thought.
I'll do what it takes. Yeah.
Yeah. That light just went out.
Interesting. Battery did?
Should it matter?
It's a little darker.
Yeah, they were on for a bunch. I guess I don't have a choice. In Navajo culture, it's forbidden to talk about skinwalkers because it's almost like there is evil that you might experience day to day in this world, and then there's an elevated evil that might be something that causes someone to do something like this. And the most frightening thing of all is it wasn't even initially a negative thing. Originally, the skinwalker, or the ability to transform into an animal, was actually to be helpful. It was originally because settlements had medicine men, and medicine men needed to travel great distances through the mountains, through the Navajo Nation, and they wanted to have the ability to turn into animals in order to climb, move about, fly even. It wasn't until it became something more wicked and vile that it turned into what we're talking about here tonight. And it's really actually sad because if you go back to the origins of Navajo spiritual beliefs, it's a very peaceful thing. Now, originally, if you go back to the origins of the history, it wouldn't be Navajo, they would be called Dene. Now, Dene refers to the people. Some would say that that's what it transfers to, but to be more literal to my understanding, I think Dene means de, up, and ne, down to the earth. It's actually referring to people that are up from the air that have come down to the surface of earth, which is why earth and the ground actually mean quite a bit to people in Dene culture. Now, going even further back to the spiritual origins, there were Dene people, the five-fingered being, and then there were holy people. Now, our world, Earth, which is known in Navajo culture as the glittering world, is actually the fourth world that these spirits would have traveled through. So Dene people went through 1, 2, 3 worlds and then wound up on the glittering world, our world, which was the fourth world, which now it is very important in Navajo culture, or Dene culture, to bring balance to Earth. And when it comes to balance, so you have the good, and then you have the adversary. The adversary needs to be kept away from the good, what is holy. Now, in Dene culture, they do everything they can to make sure that Earth is respected and everything is of light, everything is good, which is why it's just as tragic as it is horrifying when darkness saw the opportunity to make themselves present to those that were practicing skinwalking, practicing forming themselves into animals. It's like darkness sort of tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, that thing you're doing, that's great, but let me help you do that just a little bit faster. Let me help you get to a little bit easier. I know a better way. And sadly enough, some people chose to listen. And what was once a way for medicine men to travel more quickly through this earth is now the darkest thing one can imagine. It's nothing but harm and plight, and some say that skinwalkers even bring disease onto communities.
In Navajo culture, life is often described as an energy or kind of wind that blows through you. But some people have within them a dark wind. The dark wind can be seen in those who are greedy or selfish or disinterested in helping their community in any way. They are corrupt with a negativity that can attract evil itself. This evil will look for what is good in men and then corrode it and meld a person into doing the evil's bidding, often with the promise of power and strength in exchange. Disease, famine, drought, and tragedy are only some of the terrible things said to be brought upon the land where a Skinwalker dwells. Skinwalkers are also said to be the cause of bad luck and misfortune. They are known to intentionally disrupt holy native ceremonies and can even affect weather. They have incredible strength and speed, and it is said that Skinwalkers will even mimic voices. Even in animal form, they will cry out in voices that are both of strangers as well as people you may know, or even your own voice.
Hey! Who are you? I can help you. Who's out there? I don't want any help. I see you.
Most threatening of all, though, a Skinwalker with enough knowledge can possess other animals, and if able to lock eyes with a person, can even possess a human being. A witch who wishes to become a Skinwalker may not always try and obtain their powers with the intention to cause harm, but the evil that grants their abilities will often see to it that the Skinwalker will carry with it a plague of darkness. Skinwalkers are of evil, and what was once sacred and medicinal is now shamed and forbidden.
I think it's fascinating that, you know, it doesn't matter what the culture is, where these people are from, whatever religion or anything, there's always something comes into what is supposed to be good, what's supposed to be pure. And we as humans, there's always that portion of people that'll come in and take advantage of it or have their own malicious intent, their own selfish ways of thinking, and it ruins it, and it completely just spreads. And now, like you're saying, you know, all we're talking about is the negative portion about it, because that's what's lived on all these centuries later.
It's as if, at least in this particular subject, evil won.
Right.
And now this what was probably a gift in the culture of medicine men, something that Navajo was proud of, now it's something that they're terrified of, that they avoid. You can't even talk about it.
Yeah, and it hasn't even just won in the minds of the people that aren't even a part of the culture. The people in the culture are even like, this small amount of people ruined it for everybody, and now we're not even gonna tolerate somebody wearing a fox head or a pelt or whatever, like, because there are still good medicine men that help.
Exactly. And like a lot of these stories obviously started like in the past, but this is something that like still continues on to this day. There are Native Americans who have even mentioned like going to friends' houses and seeing pelts that have like the writing for the rituals on them, and like sort of realizing like the people they knew or people that they know even actively are still being drawn into this darkness. And it's really sad that something can take something, like you said, that was so holy and corrupt it into something so dark.
And I would be willing to bet that a lot of the people might even not know what they're getting themselves into. You know, they'd be like, oh wow, yeah, Skinwalkers, that sounds dark and mysterious, and then it's like a cliff edge. You take one step too far and then all of a sudden, who knows what could happen from there.
There probably are those folks out there are total naive and they don't know the whole history of their tribe or their people and stuff, and they just go in blindly going, ooh, magic stuff, that's cool, you know. And
they could look very attractive to them.
That's the other thing too, is like, it's still a form of magic. It's just dark magic.
There's also other like crime-like things involved, like we've discussed, grave robbing.
Yeah, they'll have rituals that they have to perform, and some of those even include human body parts. And skinwalkers are known to dig up graves and actually use human bodies for ritual, either bone, or even if the body is not fully decayed, they will use the flesh. And that's just terrifying because it once again shows how depraved a person has to get to be willing to do
There's
those
just no moral
acts.
compass there. There's that they look at a cemetery that would be, you know, hollow ground for most folks, to dig up and just defile or desecrate or just mess with someone's body like it was something in your sock drawer. You know, it's like
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like a lot of different media will try to paint like skinwalkers in different lights, but they're evil and they're willingly evil, and that's just like a known fact about it. It's not confusion, it's not
because
anything like that. It's they're making a horrible choice and they know what they're doing.
They do, because witchcraft isn't even taboo in Navajo culture. It's like us looking at a pharmacist studying medicine. When they study ritual and witchcraft, it's not taboo, so they know where the line is. They know when they're stepping into something like that's the dark side.
And that's exactly it. In order to learn how to defend against darkness, a lot of the times they have to learn about the darkness, and that's always where darkness, like Matt said, finds its way in and will tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I know you're working really hard to be able to do this thing, but if you do it my way, it'll be so much easier.
Now, Michael, you also told me there are a couple ways people will often defend themselves against skinwalkers.
Yeah, obviously probably the best way to defend against skinwalkers is don't be afraid of it. And obviously, you know, that's easier said than done. If you're sitting
that's what I was
camping
thinking,
outside, or you're living in a house in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, and you're hearing noises, and you go out to the window, and you see a wolf or a coyote outside, and it stands up on two and starts walking towards you. You know, the first thing, it's kind of creepy. You know, the fear automatically there, right? So that's kind of hard to use. You know, don't be scared of it. But things like ritual ash, preferably cedar ash around, from what I've understood. But any type of campfire, any fire that you used for a ritual or praying or anything, use that ash. You can use it in protection around your property, protection on yourself. That would be the two main things that I've found that tend to work. Probably the ash better than the not being afraid, because
honestly, one of the most frightening things I think would have to be being out anywhere in this desert, in these mountains at night, and hearing a voice call out. It might be someone you know, it might be your own voice calling back at you, but that would actually be terrifying. And there's all kinds of stories actually of that happening out here. I've talked to several people, not even unconvinced it hasn't happened to me, to us, even on the ghost tour.
There's actually one night in particular where you and Mike had an experience that seemed potentially...
She's talking about the night at the train station?
Yeah.
After a ghost tour. I don't know what happened that night.
Yeah, I don't know, because I had gone into my truck to go pick up stuff and
yeah,
clean
yeah,
up.
It was after. We
Yeah,
were
so
cleaning up.
I had walked to my truck to go clean up props and get my truck.
And I went to lock up the bathrooms over by where we start. And
So I'm starting up the vehicle. I have my door open and I look, and you're walking towards me, like on the other side of the parking lot. You walked all the way across the parking lot towards me.
I walked. Normally we meet each other. He looked up and I'm walking through the darkness like, hey, Mike. No, and he's like, what? I'm like, come here. And like, I walk him back to the bathroom.
Yeah, I left my truck and I just decided, okay, let's go see what's going on.
Matt's shaken up, what's up? And like, I walk and I explained to him how moments earlier, I went to lock up the bathroom like you do. It's quiet, just me, the sounds of nature, and it's dark and it's quiet, and I'm just gonna reach in and close the door. And when I reach in, a voice spoke to me in the bathroom. In this small, single bathroom, and it wasn't very clear. I don't know what it said. It's gonna sound strange, but if I had to describe it, I would say almost like somebody without a tongue. It got me. Hello? And like, I turned on the light. No one's in there. I start trying to do the door. Like, did I hear the door scoot on the tile wrong? Nothing. There's nothing there. It's empty. It's like 100 nights before. It's empty. So I go back and I get you, and you and me are lighting
checking
and
everything.
doing it. And we're like, okay,
Right.
like we're trying to debunk this, and there's nothing there. And I'm like, okay, chalk that up to a strange experience.
Yeah.
But then you and I, we walked back.
Right. Yeah, I went and got my truck. I drove by.
We put our equipment
Put all our
in the
equipment
car.
in the stuff, and we're just sitting there talking.
We're sitting there talking. It dawns on us.
It's quiet.
It's like a tomb. It's quiet.
It's
There's
quiet.
no crickets. There's no birds. There's no wind. And we were already a little rattled by this, so we're like, you notice how quiet it is?
This is the desert at night. You
hear frogs, you hear bugs.
It's literally like we're in a vacuum. And only sound is us talking to each other. And I'm like, you notice how quiet it is? And you're like, yeah. And I'm like, isn't it strange? Right after this voice, something like this happens.
And it was like, wasn't right about then something kind of just
all of
like
a sudden,
birds or something just went like right by us, and
like bats out of a belfry, birds, owls, all these different winged creatures. They just flew out of the train station.
Yeah.
It startled us. We turned towards it and watched birds escaping into the sky.
And then it was like, okay, you could hear the wind again.
And then nature returned.
And then all of a sudden, all the birds and everything went quiet. And we're like, okay, but you can still hear the wind and everything. But all the animals went quiet.
And we're just like,
and we're like, okay.
What
and then all of a sudden you heard,
Ooh. That's right. Ooh. You heard cooing. And we're like,
it was a freaking owl
nature's
on the
been
mercantile.
restored. Yeah.
It was like one thing after another.
Yeah, and I remember we were like, well, call it a night. Like we got it. We just drove in.
Yeah, because we were, other than the campers that are around, and it was late, so they would have been sleeping. There was nobody in town.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
That was a very memorable little experience. I mean, Skinwalker, I don't know, but it had a few it had a few ingredients that I've heard in stories in relation with Skinwalkers. I mean, the voice, the animals under almost like in somebody else's control.
Yeah,
I felt watched that night.
We did.
Well, you guys, I'm kind of jealous because I wasn't there for that story or that other time you heard that voice.
Oh,
Remember?
Oh yes,
Coming from
the one on the ghost tour.
The one on
Yeah,
the ghost tour.
that one, exactly.
Yeah, that was a fun
That
one.
time it wasn't just us. That time,
Yeah, because at that time you didn't even know what was going on.
a
at
tour of
first.
20 or more people heard this one.
Yeah, because we were at, and if you know, on the ghost tour, we stop at the Prospector Rock and everything. Matt's up there, and
I
he's
stand
telling
on
a
the
story.
stone, elevated above the
And
crowd a
we
little
have
bit.
the two Lantern Pete folks and myself. We kind of stand behind folks and keep an eye on things. While Matt was telling his
I'm up there
story
giving
about the
my
Prospector
story about that section of the history,
the history of the town right there, I heard off to my left out into the desert there, I heard help. And at first I didn't even know. I was like, okay, maybe it was just someone in the audience. But then, I'm like, I hear, help me. And I'm start walking towards it. So I'm walking down and I get probably a good 100, 200 foot, and it's getting louder, and I stop and I look behind me, and we had another guy, Captain Billy was with us that night. He was on the tour, and he came up behind me. He goes, what's going on? I go, listen. And you heard, somebody help me.
I think that's when I jumped
yeah,
off
and
the rock. I was
you're
like,
hey,
all right,
guys,
guys,
what's going on?
Somebody needs help. Hang on a second. I paused the tour because I thought somebody needed help.
We got our flights, and we're looking. We're still hearing the help me, but we can't
But no
see
one's
anything.
there.
We're looking around, and
We're
just past this
right-
part of desert is a parking lot. There's no cars or anything in the parking lot.
We're literally where this voice is coming from.
Yeah, so it's like, and then I guess it just stopped. Because we ended up going back to the tour, but it was like we were
We
looking
continued
around.
the tour, yeah, and then everyone's like, "Who is there?" I'm like, "I don't know.
We don't know.
Like,
We never found anybody.
But it wasn't like we couldn't find him. We went where
the place.
the voice was coming
Yeah,
from.
it was there, but
There
not
was
there.
Nope. Yeah, it's like it was trying to draw us, and it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting 3 of you to show up.
Right, it was like too many.
Yeah,
Or
it
something.
was strange.
That was a different experience there.
Yeah, it's crazy. The proximity of these two stories are very close too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
they
both
took
take
place-
place
they
in
took
like
place,
the
like,
same
feet apart,
area,
yeah.
very close to the outskirts of town where the desert starts.
It's interesting that you mentioned how these stories do take place in such a close vicinity, because this town is in the desert, the base of the Superstition Mountains, and there are even a lot of people in this town. Like, we mentioned Skinwalkers on the tour. You see the reaction. People out here know what a Skinwalker is. People out here know how much the subject is to be
Right.
avoided.
And even if they don't know what a Skinwalker is, they've heard of it.
They
and
know the
that
name,
it's
and they
bad.
see the reactions. And there
Yeah.
are people in this town that don't want to discuss them. They don't want to hear them discussed. So the subject of Skinwalkers is definitely controversial in the town of Goldfield. However,
even given how controversial this topic is in the town, I was actually fortunate enough to have one family agree to conduct an interview with me on this very subject. One of Goldfield's shop owners, who are in fact Navajo, agreed to sit down with me in an undisclosed location and speak about the practice of skinwalking, both locally and on the reservation. However, very early into the process, it became apparent how uncomfortable they were in discussing this sensitive subject. And even though we had initially agreed that the interview would be revealed here on this podcast, it was obvious that the family had become discomforted on the topic. So respectfully, we have chosen not to show any of the footage recorded that night, but let that stand as a statement as to how real and frightening this subject is to those in Navajo culture.
So now we've heard some of these real-life accounts. We know some of the history of the Skinwalker. Some of you out there might be thinking, okay, it's probably nothing more than legends and stories passed down through generations by the Native Americans that have lived in this area. But then we also know that a lot of people who are Navajo, they've seen things. They believe the Skinwalker to be 100% real. And, you know, there's something that happened back in the year 2000 that kind of pushes me towards one side of these two possibilities. So, a few hours north of here, there are the Navajo Rangers. Two of these rangers were assigned to helm a new team for their department. A team that would be the ones to call for any sort of calls or complaints involving the paranormal. Everything from UFO reports to residential hauntings and, of course, Skinwalkers. These two men, their names are John Dover and Stan Milford, and you might have seen them on different TV shows. And although they have recently retired, you will still see them do interviews and investigate cases, as well as consult for all these TV shows, including an episode of Unsolved Mysteries from its latest season. It's in that episode that Stan tells a story about his encounter with a Skinwalker. He was actually out one night, he went to see a movie, and he was driving home, and as he was driving, along a stretch of road running adjacent to a fence that separated the road from some farmland, and it was at this point that he noticed something on the other side of the fence following his car. He described it as long, running on all fours, and similar in the shape to a greyhound. However, its body was completely white. All of a sudden, it hops right over that fence and continues chasing alongside his car. Now, this is a highway road, mind you, so he knew this thing was going at least 55 miles an hour just to keep up with his car. Stan mentions, at one point, he looked into the eyes of this creature, and he described them as bright orange and almost self-illuminating, and he, obviously, was terrified. So, kind of dialing this back, thinking for a moment, there's a law enforcing body that is taking these accounts so seriously that they are developing a department to field these cases. Now that tells me how much more real can you get? In fact, on that episode of Unsolved Mysteries, John Dover has a quote, and I have it here, I don't want to mess it up. He says, "We don't like to use the term believe, because to believe is an act of faith based on no evidence. You weren't there. You didn't see what I saw."
Didn't see what I saw.
Now, if those aren't words that will stay with you after
Profound.
seeing that, I don't know what will. So that was really interesting.
It is, and it's fascinating that there is, like you said, like a body of law enforcement dedicated to something, which there's so many things like in the world of cryptids and stuff that people, you know, it's belief, but there's so much weight to it when there's actual law enforcement dedicated to it. And I find his story sort of interesting too. There's certain accounts where you can just sort of tell, like, I don't think that was a Skinwalker, I don't know. And there's other accounts where you're like, maybe.
Right.
It's actually interesting because that account reminds me a lot of something you had happen to you.
I don't actually tell this story very often. By which I mean I don't usually tell it at all. It's probably one of the most terrifying things that has ever happened to me. But back when I was a little younger and a little dumber, I was out with my sister and some friends camping somewhere very close by to where we are now. I will not disclose the exact location. But we were out camping, being young and stupid.
I don't think so.
And we ended up passing by some hikers who were basically like, hey, just so you know, like, there have been reports of coyotes, like, in this area. And so we weren't super worried about it. We just sort of, like, knew it was a thing.
I know. I'm sort of back and forth on it. Oh, there's someone walking towards us.
You guys might want to watch out. There's some coyotes back there.
But then night was winding down. It was getting closer to, like, us sort of just heading out. And we heard coyotes. And they were close. And so it sort of freaked everybody out. We all went and started walking back to our cars. I was walking with my sister. And all of a sudden I heard a voice. And it sounded like one of our friends who was with us that night. Like up ahead, and my sister was waiting. We were sort of like waiting on the path for her boyfriend to catch up, her boyfriend at the time. And so she's like, oh, I'll wait here. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'm gonna go catch up with our friend. So I start walking over there. And there's no one there. And it was just sort of like a weird, odd moment because all of a sudden I'm in this parking lot. My car's right there, my sister's car is there. And it's silent. It was like someone had plugged my ears with cotton. I could not hear a single thing. And I freaked out. I was raised superstitious. I was raised in Mexican culture. I was raised to believe when something feels off in your gut, that something is off. So I go and I get in my car. I text my sister. I see her. She goes and gets in her car. I'm setting up my phone to connect to my car so that I can play music on the drive home. And she basically is like, hey, I'm on my way out, and I see her drive off. So I'm sitting there. And then I go to turn on my headlights. And when I turn on my headlights, I see that there's a figure down the path. And I don't know what it was to this day, and I never will. But it looked like a person, a man, a very tall figure standing on the path, wearing a coyote pelt. But his face was gone. It was like he had no face. It was like he had a piece of cloth over his face that was just like tied and just nothing. But it was like his skin. It freaked me out, to say the least. And so I throw my car in reverse and I start driving, and it starts walking towards me, almost like shuffling, almost like it's like dragging one leg, just like slowly creeping towards me. I reverse until I hit the road. I peel out of there. And I still, like I said, I still to this day don't know what it was. I don't know what it was that I saw. I never will. But I still remember the way that it looked and the way that it walked towards me. Yeah. In your story, you talk about how it keeps up with the car, which in my mind tells me that if it wanted to, it would have kept up with me, and it chose not to. I don't know why.
Wow.
I'm not going to question it. I gave myself the goosebumps.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about it. Let's go camping.
No, that's horrifying.
That would be weird.
And that's the thing, like, it's one thing we ghost tours and we're like, hey, did you hear that? No, did you hear that? But alone just
and
you
seeing.
and it's aware of your presence. It saw you.
It did.
It was approaching you.
The way that it looked at me, even without eyes, still like burns
See
in my
you
memory.
without seeing you.
Yeah.
That's scary.
I don't know whether it was in the process of shifting into a different form, like from its coyote form, I don't know what it was, but
Yeah, because
it
a coyote.
it was
pelt,
there. I don't know what it was, but it was there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like, is it a skinwalker? Is it not a skinwalker? But I mean, that story. I mean,
Pretty close to it.
yeah, like there's not a lot of options there. That's horrifying, and I don't think I've ever seen one, a skinwalker, but there is that time I thought I heard one. I wasn't by myself, but it was actually late one night after a ghost tour. Me and someone else were in the hoist house, which is part of the town of Goldfield. It's actually where they used to lower miners down into the mine. So we're at the hoist house. We're about to leave. We're getting probably one of my belongings from the hoist house that maybe I'd set aside before a ghost tour. Now the ghost tour is over, everyone's gone home except for us, and we're venturing in to grab something from the hoist house and simply go home. We unlock the hoist house and it's dark, it's late at night. We leave the lights out, and the girl that was with me, she stood by the door, just didn't go in, just kind of casually, as you do. We're about to leave, just stands at the doorway, 1 foot out the door, and I venture into the hoist house to grab something off of the countertop on the opposite side when suddenly there's just this noise. I didn't really notice it at first because it almost was subtle. But then I'm listening. It sounds to me like the wind, really strong wind, like stock wind out of a horror film. And I remember thinking how strange that the wind through the buildings of Goldfield makes that horrifying sound. And then it dawned on me immediately after, no, it doesn't. That sound does not happen here. I've never heard that sound. I was like, wait. And I turn, and I'm gonna ask the girl that's with me simply, what is that? And when I turn around and look at her, she's pale, she's frozen, she's just staring into the darkness that is Goldfield from the hoist house. She looks petrified. And I walk up beside her, and I'm listening, and I realize it's not the wind. It sounds like screaming. But the screaming also sounds a lot like the sound that has been described often as the sound a skinwalker makes. If you can, imagine a choir of voices all screaming somewhere between man, somewhere between animal, in like harmony. And without breath, it's just continuous. What seemed for at least 15 seconds, 20 seconds, all in unison, there's just continuous scream. And I'd never heard anything like it. And all rationality was leaving. I was like, that sounds like what's supposed to be the sound of a skinwalker. So I look at her next to me, and she's just like jaw dropped, eyes wide. What is that? I say. She turns to me and goes,
You know exactly what that is.
and I'm like, I don't know that I want to believe that, but I kept listening. And soon 20 seconds became 40 seconds. It became a minute. It's still going on. And if I had to guess, this sound is coming from 30 yards away, 40 yards away. And all I can think is, can we get to the cars? And so I'm like, do we go to the cars? And she looks and just, like didn't say anything, just shook her head. And I'm like, so what do we do? And I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this. I've never heard this in my life. And then I start thinking, the Matt part kicks in, I gotta record this. So I reach in and I grab my phone out of my pocket. Now I've heard before one of the reasons it's so hard to document skinwalkers, whether it be on video or in audio, is because they are aware somehow that you're thinking of them. And I hold that phone up and I go to hit record, and the moment my finger graces the record button, silence. Dead stop.
I think that'd be scarier because now you don't know where it's at.
Exactly. No, I was like, and I think if I dug into my phone, if my old phone, you would still have about 15 seconds of just nothing, which was me being like in shock. It just disappeared. And I was like, okay, that sort of adds to the whole it could be a skinwalker thing. And we didn't leave right away. We closed the door and sat there for a minute, gave it a few minutes, and then I'm like, all right, on 3 we run to the cars. And that's what we did. 1, 2, 3. And to this day, I don't know what happened. I'm not saying it was a skinwalker. I didn't see anything, but we know what it wasn't.
Right, we know what it wasn't.
So that's always been a very memorable experience for me. And you just mentioned giving yourself the goosebumps, and yeah, reliving that sort of gives me the goosebumps. It's no, that's the thing. And like the way she goes, you know exactly what that is. Out here, it's not so strange. In fact, I do believe her father is Navajo, so she knew a lot of history about it. She had told me some things about skinwalkers, so when she's like, you know exactly what it is, I'm like, yeah, we're thinking the same thing. But that was absolutely a terrifying experience that one does not quickly forget.
I mean, between your story, Chloe, and Matt, that it's just, the goosebumps are real. And the fact of the matter is you guys all have these amazing stories, and we've all heard them, and I'm hearing them now. I'm not from here originally. I've only been here a couple years, so I haven't seen anything or heard anything quite yet, but I'm sure you guys will be the first to know. And then maybe you, the viewer, might know in a follow-up episode.
We'll make sure you get your experiences.
Yeah, the more we get out there,
and then we'll leave you. That's how you learn.
Okay, all right. That's a nice little initiation, I guess.
Exactly.
How long is it going to be until I'm like not the new guy? Oh, that's fine.
You're never going to not be the new guy unless we get another new guy, which
That's
means
true.
you're
That's
gone.
true.
But don't worry, his name will also be Riley.
You'll always
Yeah, we'll
be,
just
and
get-
you'll always be taller.
Another Riley.
Perfect.
Every year we have a new Riley model.
That's what this chair is for, I guess. All right.
Riley chair.
That's fine. But I'm sure you guys probably have even more stories.
No, actually, you know what's? It's kind of funny you saying that. You're talking. You don't have any personal skinwalker stories because you're not originally from here and you moved here not long ago. I know a guy that did experience something and moved away from here because of it. At least I think it was because of it. It was the last thing that happened before he moved away very suddenly.
It's very coincidental.
Yeah. So maybe you don't want it to happen. Now, I don't know where he is on Supernatural, but he knows what shouldn't happen. He knows, like, this is a guy that on a whim, I know this guy. I'm not going to say his name, but I know him. He actually was basically a resident of Goldfield. This guy would literally pitch a tent, and then he might sleep in the tent, he might sleep on the ground outside. This is a guy that walked through the desert barefoot. This is a guy that had guns and dogs and just wasn't afraid of this desert.
Right.
However, one night, and he came in and told me this story because he's like, you're the one person that's gonna understand. You're the one person that's gonna believe. But just the night before he told me that, he was out. I literally think if where I'm pointing, on the other side of this wall, maybe 50 yards on the other side of this wall, he was out in the middle of the desert in a pickup truck that had the lights on the top of the cabin. And the lights weren't on at the time. I think he was just kicking back with his dog, having a beer, enjoying like a warm night out in the summer of the desert. And Suddenly, his dog, who is normally very timid, he looks over and the dog just like reading a growl and looking out the window growling. He's like, whoa, what do you see? And the dog just starts barking out, looking through the windshield, just into the desert. And he's like, whoa, like, hey boy, like, calm down. And the dog's just barking and barking. He's like, okay. So he opens his door and he's like, go get him. And like the dog jumps out, but the dog won't go. The dog just sits by the door barking, and he realizes that the dog's hair is just up, rigid. That dog's spine is like rigid, and this dog is barking aggressively. The way he describes it, almost like to the point of like foaming, and he's never seen this type of behavior from his dog. So he grabs his gun, rifle, something, shotgun, something. He grabs it. He steps out, and he's like, "What?" And when he steps out, he hears off from the distance, "Hello," and he goes, "Whoa!" He's like, "Hey, who's out there? Like, go ahead. Like, who's out there?" The dog's barking. And he's like, okay, screw this. He hops up at the back of his truck, and he turns the lights on. And when he shines those lights, he can see all around him. There's nobody there, but that dog, the dog is just going crazy. And he's like, who's out there? And then finally, no one's answering. He's like, I have a gun. Hello? Dog calms down. Everything seems okay. He's like, all right. And again, hello? And the dog just goes crazy again, and he's like, whoever's out there, you need to identify yourself. He's like, private property. He's like yelling whatever. He's like, and then all of a sudden, the dog again stops barking, but this time the dog jumps back into the cabin of the truck, and he has no idea like what is causing this, but he's like, I need to get out of here too. So he jumps back in the cabin, and he swears while he was getting back in the cabin, he actually heard a voice go, come here. And he's like, nope. And this guy with a dog, with a gun, with all the experience out of the outdoors, nope. And he hightails it out of there, and he said his dog was not himself for the rest of the night. That dog was paranoid. That dog was whimpering. That dog was tail between the legs for at least the rest of that night. He come in to Goldfield the next day and told me that story and how shook up he was, and he goes, it ain't, because it don't feel right. Like it's, he goes, I feel very shaken up after that because I couldn't sleep. That's not normal. And like 2 weeks later, he actually moved out of state. And maybe he was planning on moving out of state, but if he was, he didn't tell me. He just suddenly was moving.
Maybe I don't want to see or hear something.
Yeah.
You don't.
No, I don't know. It's
that face right there alone.
No, this group at this table, we're definitely somebody. We're a group that we take this stuff on. Like we ask for this stuff. However, there is such a thing as biting off more than you can chew, and the Skinwalker might. I don't know. Might be that bite.
We'll have to wait and see when that time happens.
Yeah, we have discussed potentially looking for one. I don't know if we're gonna or not. This guy definitely wants to. So there might be a follow-up episode where we actually go out looking for one. Yeah. I don't know.
They may send me out with my own camera.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, if there is a follow-up episode, there is a 90% chance I will not be in it. Because that was enough for me.
And so this is Mike on his on solo adventures here on the frontier.
Mm-hmm. It's one of them found footages.
Yeah, we'll give him a camera. Hopefully he comes back or we find it. Right?
Yeah, so a lot of times when it comes to subjects of what's out there, the paranormal, the supernatural, it's so easy to end with, well, take what you will with a grain of salt and choose to believe what you want to believe, but there are certain subjects that have a little more depth, a little more evidence, a little more backing them up. Now, you might not believe in something like a Skinwalker, but if you were to be here, where we are, surrounded by the people that we are surrounded by, it's actually not all that hard to believe in. With centuries of Navajo culture, them forbidding it to be spoken about, sometimes even being offended by people who don't know what they're talking about, discussing a subject such as Skinwalkers, it becomes a little less about choosing to believe and more about choosing if you just don't want to believe. So I will leave you to choose for yourself. But if you ever find yourself wandering these deserts at night, I would choose wisely. Good night.